Every case leaves a trail. Every timeline hides a truth. Welcome to Zion Case Archive, where investigations are reconstructed, evidence is explained, and stories are told with clarity. This is investigative storytelling. What begins as an ordinary night can sometimes lead to questions no one is prepared to answer. In early April of 2024, a young woman named Sade Robinson went out for what seemed like a normal evening. Hours later, she would be reported missing. Days later, investigators searching near the shoreline of Lake Michigan made a discovery that would shift the entire case. But at the time, no one yet understood what that discovery meant. Small details would eventually reveal something far more serious. Tonight, we carefully reconstruct the timeline, the investigation, and the questions that followed. This is not just a story of crime, it is a story about answers, accountability, and remembrance. Milwaukee is a city with a vibrant community and active nightlife. Like many urban centers, it sees thousands of social interactions daily. In most cases, evenings conclude without incident. However, in rare circumstances, an ordinary night can become the starting point of a much larger investigation. Sade Robinson was a 19-year-old college student living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Friends described her as driven, creative, and focused on building her future. She balanced school and work like many young adults finding their independence. Those who knew her said she had goals, and she spoke openly about wanting more for herself. On April 1, 2024, she went on a date with a man she had recently met. At first, nothing about the evening appeared unusual, but when she did not return home and stopped responding to calls, concern began to grow. By the next day, her loved ones reported her missing. When a missing persons report is filed, law enforcement begins by reviewing the individual's last known contacts. Surveillance footage, phone data, and financial transactions are examined to establish a timeline. Officers speak with friends and family to determine whether any unusual behavior occurred before the disappearance. What started as worry quickly became urgency. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline carefully, and one detail quickly stood out. Surveillance footage showed Sade arriving at a restaurant that evening. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but later footage would raise new questions. But as investigators continued reviewing the timeline, one detail began raising difficult questions. It is how every piece connects that reveals the larger picture. Digital evidence became critical. Phone location data, transaction history, and surveillance cameras across the city helped map movements. In the hours following her last known communication, attempts to reach her were unsuccessful. Investigators reconstruct scenes without assumption. They rely on timestamps, traffic cameras, transaction records, and verified digital footprints. Reconstruction is not storytelling, it is verification. Every case begins with a central anchor, the last confirmed sighting. From there, events are layered forward and backward. Sometimes, even a 5-minute gap can change everything. Days later, investigators searching near Lake Michigan made a troubling discovery. Human remains were located along a remote stretch of shoreline. The site was secured immediately. Forensic teams documented the area carefully while evidence was collected for analysis. As the investigation continued, authorities began connecting details. Detectives reviewed digital communications. Vehicles were examined. Witnesses were interviewed. Each piece, small on its own, began forming a larger picture. On April 4th, law enforcement publicly identified a suspect. He was later taken into custody. Charges would follow. When formal charges are filed, a case moves into the court system. During arraignment, the accused is informed of the charges. Prosecutors must present evidence supporting probable cause. Defense attorneys review the legality and strength of that evidence. Pre-trial hearings may follow before a full trial proceeds. Throughout this process, investigators emphasize one principle: evidence, not assumption. After arrest, the suspect appeared in court. Charges were formally presented. The legal system requires evidence to be tested publicly. Defense and prosecution both examine the facts, and under the law, the presumption of innocence remains until proven otherwise. Preliminary hearings determine whether sufficient evidence exists for trial. This stage can take months. Meanwhile, the community waits. Cases like this often prompt broader discussions about personal safety, digital communication, and community awareness. Meeting new people online requires caution. Verify identities. Share plans with trusted contacts. Location sharing can enhance safety. Emergency contact features exist for a reason. Public discussions reflect the concern many feel when incidents disrupt a sense of normalcy. When a case unfolds, it affects families, neighborhoods, and entire cities. Vigils were held across Milwaukee. Friends and classmates gathered to remember Sade. Social media filled with messages of support and calls for justice. The case also raised questions about trust, safety, and responsibility in the digital age. It reminded families to check in on loved ones. It reminded communities to stay connected, and it showed how deeply one life can impact many others. True crime stories are not entertainment. They are reminders. They are lessons in awareness. They are reflections of responsibility. As the legal process continues, one truth remains clear: a young woman's life mattered, and her story deserves to be told with care. If you value respectful, fact-based storytelling, consider subscribing for more documentary investigations. In our next case, we examine how one overlooked security camera rewrote an entire investigation, because sometimes the smallest detail speaks the loudest. Behind every headline is a human story. Investigations are not about speculation, they are about facts. This was the case of Sade Robinson. This is Zion Case Archive, documenting the evidence, telling the timeline.